So before we move on from the Parthenon, I do want to briefly talk about the East Pediment, just some sculptures on the East Pediment. I know that your book talks about the Parthenon, and I know that we have that video on the Parthenon, so we'll cover it fairly well, although they don't really talk about the sculptures too much in the video. But anyway, on the East Pediment of the Parthenon, we have a scene which is the birth of Athena. So the story goes, and there of course are several versions, but one of the versions is that Zeus heard a prophecy that said that his daughter Athena would overthrow him. So he either ate Athena at her birth, or he ate Athena's mom when she was pregnant with her. And then time passes, and one day Zeus gets a really bad headache. And one of the gods hits him on the head, and Athena emerges out of his head fully grown and clad in armor. So here is Zeus, this is the artist's recreation, but here's Zeus right here, and here is Athena kind of pointing to his head, or has her hand on his head. So at Athena's birth, the gods and goddesses gather around. So that's what we have depicted up here. Some of them are aware of what's happening, like these people seem actively involved. Others don't seem as aware of what's going on. The figures that I want us to look at are these three female figures right here. So they would be over here. And they are either the three fates or the three goddesses, Hesta, Aphrodite, and Diomed. And they are waking up from sleep. The reason I want to talk about them is because they are so expertly rendered. Here we have either these three fates or three goddesses clad in drapery. And the way that the artist depicted the drapery is just breathtaking. We can see, remember, we don't have female nudes at this point in Greek art, but we almost have nudity here. What we have is an intense study of the female form with the sheer drapery over their bodies. I like to remember that this is marble, and that the artists are doing this with marble. And here's a really great close-up. I mean, just look at the texture of the fabric. It's not fabric, it's marble. But the way that they're able to get the fabric to cling to the body, so really it's almost a nude, but it's nude without being nude. Because remember, it's okay for men to be depicted in the nude, but it's not okay for women. But they still want to explore the female form. How do they do that? This is how they do that. And they just use such a great, wonderful treatment of drapery. I mean, you can see every fold kind of conveying the form beneath. So I just bring in this image so we can remember where we were in the archaic period. Okay, a slight sense of the female form, but that's really it. And then now in the classic period, we just have this gorgeous depiction of the female body and wonderful treatment of clothes. So the rest of the artworks for the classic period are discussed in your book. So I just put up here a summary of the classic period of Greek art. And I will also post this on Blackboard so you can check that out. Basically, the summary of art at this point is that in the 5th century we had sculptures that carefully maintained balance between simplicity and ornamentation. And this is fundamental to Greek classical art. By the mid-5th century, we had standards that were established by Phidias and Polyclitus, remember the canon of proportions, for ideal proportions and idealized forms of human figures. But now we're going to transition into we have the late classic period. The 4th century is called the late classic period. It's when artists began to challenge and modify these standards of Phidias and Polyclitus. So they established a new canon of proportions for male figures. They were usually taller, and they had smaller heads. During the classic period, we had calm, noble detachments of early figures, and this is going to give way to more sensitively rendered images of men and women. And here is an example here. So the expressions are going to become more dreamy, maybe self-examining, or maybe depicting a fleeting anxiety. And patrons are going to lose interest in the images of gods and legendary heroes. And instead, they want art of minor deities in these light-hearted moments. They're not interested in grand statements of the previous period. So we have like the birth of Athena, that's this great big event on the Parthenon. Well, they're not going to be as interested in that. They're going to be interested in more playful moments. In this period, we see the earliest depiction of the first fully nude woman in a major artwork. During the 4th century, there are 3 sculptors that are dominant: Praxiteles, Lysippus, and Scopas. I think that your book might talk about all 3 of them. They at least talk about the first 2. We're going to just briefly talk about these since they are also in your book. We actually have very few artworks from these artists, and most of the artworks that we do have are probably copies. Praxiteles was active from 370 to 335 BCE, or maybe a little bit later. According to documents, we know that Praxiteles carved a marble Hermes and the infant Dionysus in the 4th century BCE. Hermes, who we see here, is the messenger god, and he is the god that leads the dead to the underworld. Dionysus, who is depicted as a baby here, is the god of wine, the grape harvest, and inspiration, and also parties. Here, Hermes is holding the infant Dionysus. We have a degree of interaction here. Hermes is looking at Dionysus, so Hermes is here and he's looking at Dionysus. They're kind of interacting there. And Dionysus is probably reaching for a bunch of grapes. So we think that Hermes is kind of playfully teasing Dionysus, so this arm is cut off, but originally, I guess it would have curved around and he would have been holding a bunch of grapes, and that these grapes would have been teasing Dionysus, who of course is the god of wine, so therefore he loves grapes. So it's kind of this moment, like this teasing, playful moment between an older brother and a younger brother. And Hermes being the older brother, and of course Dionysus being the younger brother. The gods are seen here as engaged in this mortal activity. So instead of being involved in like some battle or a miraculous birth, instead we have this intimate moment of these 2 brothers kind of playing. Now, recent scholarship thinks that this one is a copy, but it could be the original. We're not really sure. This one was recovered in the ruins of the Temple of Hera in Olympia, and we do know that it was originally painted. There's red paint that was found on their heads and lips. Now, I just bring this one in so that you can do a comparison between these 2. If we're looking at Polycleitus' spear bearer, and then here's Hermes and Dionysus, we can see that Hermes does indeed have a smaller head. He has a little bit more of a maybe more youthful or less defined body. This guy looks like he's a bodybuilder. This guy's certainly in shape, but maybe he doesn't hit the gym quite so often. The spear bearer has this more mature, developed body. Hermes has this interesting off-centered or off-balanced S-curve pose that requires him to lean on a post. And this contrasts with this earlier work. He seems more independent and he's standing firmly on his own. There's a light play with the shadows a little bit to create maybe more of a little bit more sensual image. So we have kind of these plays with shadows through here and with his leg also. We don't really have that with the spear bearer as much. So maybe you can think of some other similarities and differences here. He's slightly taller, his body is a little bit more elongated, and again, I think we can see definitely that smaller head proportions there. And also I think the hands fit a little bit better too. So we've been looking at nude men forever in the Greek period, in classical and archaic. And I promised that in the late classic period we would get to see some female nudes. And so here we go. Finally, we see the first major artwork of a fully naked female. And this is the Aphrodite of Knidos. Now, the original sculpture is lost, but there are many copies, many Roman copies that survive. In fact, this one is actually a composite of 2 Roman copies. So it's a little bit hard to look at as far as like it's not really the original. Now, while we saw a progression from the Pleplos Kore, there she is there. Let's find that image where I would compare it. The Pleplos Kore to the images on the Parthenon. We saw this, almost nude female. We really haven't, to this point, seen any other female. But now we see it all. So this is the first statue of a well-known Greek sculptor to depict a fully nude woman. Of course, we've seen nudity among men. It's fine. It was admired as an athletic women depicted in the nude was considered low character. Eventually, there will be a widespread acceptance of the female nude in large statues. We think that this phenomenon, this transition from, okay, you can't have women naked and now you can, might be associated with Aphrodite's new association with a Phoenician goddess, who is almost always shown in the nude. Now this one is kind of interesting. So it's that composite of these two Roman copies, and here Aphrodite she has just discarded her clothes, and she has this jug full of water, and she's actually about to step into her bath. Now we should note that it kind of looks like, oh, her hand is trying to cover herself in modesty, but actually this is just to kind of emphasize her nakedness and make the image more erotic and exciting. Now according to legend, the original, Praxiteles' original Aphrodite of Knidos, was so naturalistic that Aphrodite herself came down to earth and she saw the statue and she said, oh my gosh, when did Praxiteles see me naked? So that's like a little anecdote to explain how naturalistic it really looked. Now originally the statue was actually quite highly regarded, and it was considered the most beautiful statue that had ever been produced, and numerous copies were made. It was so beautiful and so intriguing that the citizens of Knidos displayed her in an open shrine where you could walk around all four sides. So you could enjoy yourself and view her from every angle.